So, welcome everyone to Cooperative and Mutuals Canada 2024 Co-op Week. This is the first session of the week. It is quite exciting. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that the session is available in simultaneous interpretation. So you can just click on More and then click on Interpretation and choose the language you want to listen to the session in. Bonjour, bienvenue à notre premier webinaire de la Semaine de la coopération 2024. Juste avant de commencer, je tiens juste à vous rappeler que vous pouvez accéder à la session en interprétation simultanée. Donc, vous pouvez simplement cliquer sur plus, interprétation, et écouter la session dans la langue de votre choix. Just to follow up, I'll just continue in French. You can hear everything that I say with our wonderful interpreter. Je suis heureuse d'accueillir aujourd'hui Glenn Valliere d'Arctic Co-operatives Limited, qui va nous présenter sa présentation intitulée « Innover avec un modèle de durabilité intégré ». Vous pourrez lui poser des questions à la fin de la session en levant votre main. Et la présentation vous sera fournie par la suite via courriel en français et en anglais. Et aussi, on vous enverra un petit sondage. Si vous comptez écouter plus d'une des sessions pendant Co-op Week, je vous encourage d'attendre d'avoir écouté toutes les sessions avant de répondre au formulaire. Puis, ça va nous aider à vous offrir le contenu que vous souhaitez dans le futur. So, without any further ado, I'll just let Glenn take it away. So, thank you so much for being there, Glenn.
Okay, no, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody to come out on a Monday after eating turkey and having a break there. So I'll share what we're doing here with Arctic Co-ops with our work on sustainability. I'm going to be fairly informal. That's kind of how I am anyways, but it's also a topic that we're learning about and exploring here. So what I'm going to say is something that is in process, something we're still learning about, and I may not have everything right either. So if you can follow along with that spirit of discovery and learning, that would be great. Just to start off too, I'll let you know that I do stutter. It does come out on occasion. If you don't know what it is, it might sound a bit strange if I get caught on a word or a sound. So that's all it is. I'm used to it. And again, it might just pop up on occasion. Okay, so let's get into this and see what we can discover. Next slide, please, Veronique. Oopsie, can you pop back there one? I think I've got, I'm already getting ahead of myself there. And as I mentioned too, this is a bit of a journey on our end. It's been going on about a year, but it's been going on before that as well. And now we can go to the next slide, forgive me. And part of the story of the journey and the learning process involves my own journey as a cooperator, somebody who's been a co-op manager for many years. I started in 1989 as a very young person. I fell into this world by accident. At a part-time job at a health food store that turned out to be a worker co-op. So I've sold a lot of tofu and granola over my life, and as that world went through a shakeout mode with the market becoming more corporate, I found myself laid off from a long-term job and eventually made my way north. I'd heard stories about working in the north with Arctic Co-ops from a couple of people, and it always sounded very exciting, like something I wanted to try. So about 3 years ago now, I ended up heading north first to Nunavut in Nunavut and later on to Arctic Bay with a couple of other stops for short-term stays to help out for a little bit. My experiences up north are entirely in Nunavut and mainly in traditional Inuit communities. So I have a limit to my knowledge based on that, based on my experience in the north. But still, it was a highly transformative time for me. I learned a lot. And in some ways, I'm still trying to process what I learned and understand how to use it in my job down here. When I did decide to come north last summer, I did receive a phone call being asked to stay on in some other capacity. So the role I have now started as a contract role to support the home office group to develop a sustainability model and to do some other work. They liked what I was producing. I liked to work with them in this capacity, and that involved a relocation from my home in Guelph, Ontario to Winnipeg this past summer. So again, if you told that young guy on the left side there that he'd be up in the high Arctic and moving to Winnipeg, I probably would have fallen off my chair. But here we are, still continuing with his career journey. Next slide, please, Veronique, s'il vous plaît. So I'll share a bit of background information about Arctic Co-op, just in case you don't know about us. We are somewhat unique, do some very, very interesting work, and I'll get in here. So it will be high level. There's all sorts of nooks and crannies we could work into or explore, but If you want to take some notes along the way, I'll try and answer questions during the presentation, or else you can get in touch with me afterwards. This is a whalebone carving from a carver originally from Arctic Bay, where I worked for a little bit, Manasi Akpaliapik. And it's on display at a very extensive show of historical Inuit art here in Winnipeg. So if you're in town, it's on until March 25th. I highly recommend a stop by. Okay, s'il vous plaît, Véronique. Véronique. My French is terrible, sorry. So here's some quick facts about us. This is a map of where we operate. We are entirely in the Arctic or in the subarctic. We're a member-owned co-op federation founded in 1972. A lot of the co-op members were around before that, and others have joined since. We currently have 32 members. We are entirely Indigenous owned from the member communities, the co-ops in the communities, primarily Inuit, but also substantial numbers of Dene members, and also one Gwich'in community in northern Yukon. We have a number of business channels in the north. We support a full retail suite, and is whatever's needed in that community. It's primarily food, also clothing, traditional sewing equipment, hunting equipment, ammunition, rifles, power equipment for getting out on the land, motors, ATVs, etc. We also have whole contracts for fuel services in many communities, fuel for vehicles, gasoline, diesel, home heating, aviation, and cable services as well, and also hotels. Sorry, that's a big part of our portfolio in these communities. We also have our own internal financing arm, Arctic Co-operative Development Funds. Our members can come to our fund as opposed to going to a bank. We also own corporate subsidiaries for in Iqaluit. Iqaluit never had a strong cooperative presence there, so there's places we own, and those profits will cycle back into the federation and back to the members if we have them. We also own shares in our transportation networks, Sealift, and also air carriers. We are part of Federated Co-operative Limited. Most of our materials, our food comes from them, and we're part of that larger CRS system. Our home office is down south in Winnipeg, and we have an art wholesale group that's run out of a showroom in Mississauga, a showroom as well as a warehouse. And a lot of the co-ops started as with crafts, arts, going out to the world from there. For the Federation home office, our revenue is over $300 million, and plus the individual co-ops have their own revenue sources. And our surplus for the most part go back to the members. That's something our board decides upon. If we have surplus here, do we save some for a rainy day for projects, or does it go back to the co-ops? And there is a fair bit of money that goes back to the co-ops that becomes part of their bottom line. Okay, so I should say, just to be clear too, there's on the right side of that map, there's that orange line that extends down into Quebec to pick up Senekilowak, down in the southern part of Hudson's Bay there. I want to make it clear that we don't operate in Quebec. We are in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon only. We have a sister federation is quite excellent there in Quebec, FCNQ, the Fédération Coopérative Nouveau Québec, and I just want to make sure it's clear that there is a separation in Nunavut or Northern Quebec. Next slide, please. And just for most communities will have a competitor called the Northern Store. There are a few communities that only have a co-op store, and they are quite special and quite unique. But most communities have a competitor called the Northern Store or the Northwest or some sort of name. And this is the remnants, a corporately structured remnant of the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company. They've had a long presence in Canada for a few hundred years, and they're quite good at working in hard to serve communities. So the far north of Canada, even what we might call the near north, northern Quebec, northern Ontario, etc. They also have an extensive presence in the Caribbean and also the South Pacific now. Again, this is a core corporation. They extract profits and they are sent back to shareholders, and they work with that kind of a standard corporate mandate. So that is, for the most part, the alternative in communities. I'm not here to say anything bad about them. If you want to have a good understanding of their longer history, some of their activities in Canadian history, there's a very good book came out of University of Manitoba Press, I think about a year ago, and there's a link for that I'll share again later on. Next slide, please. And just in terms of where Arctic Co-ops is placed in history, and sometimes I hesitate to share this slide because it does get into a lot of his history. This is from a school program, an Inuit school in Ottawa called Nunavut. And also to clarify, this is a general history of Inuit peoples, and it mentions the co-op model in general, not specifically Arctic co-ops. And also to be clear too, I don't know as much about Dene cultures and the Dene co-ops because of my experience. This is an area I need to learn more about. But it's if we say that co-ops often start in times of need and change, most of our co-ops started as, or many of them at least, started as people started coming off the land into settlement in the Arctic. That started about in the 50s for the most part. And this school, they put this in what they call a government era. They've categorized Inuit history into four broad areas, sort of like pre-European contact. Kalana, which is a broad term for Southerners in Inuktitut. A government era, they placed cooperatives in this zone because some of the early cooperatives were started by government. As people came off the land, there was a need to generate employment, to provide goods and services, to develop economies. So co-ops were seen as part of that solution in some communities. They were set up by the government, and I don't want to get stuck on that because it was a pretty small part. But I think it's important to understand the other components of people coming off the land. This was not always a benign process, and it's not that long ago either. There are a lot of historical um, tragedies, errors, however you want to word it. It was not always a savory process. And again, there are people alive today in communities who have been through this, who are affected by this. And some of these are unique to the far north and to the north compared to what we might know about Indigenous impacts in other parts of Canada. So have a look at those if you aren't aware of some of these events, some of these activities. It's worth having a look at. The part that I find interesting, though, is that a lot of the co-ops started in this very fervent era of the late 60s into the early 70s. As we know, this was a very dynamic time, the rise of the New Left movement and various movements. And there were, dedicated cooperative developers and dedicated Indigenous leaders and a couple of very concerned people in government that really drove the model and saw the benefits of the model for communities. And this is when a lot of our co-ops were formed. It was, again, a highly dynamic, you know, dynamic time. I'll leave it at that. The words aren't quite coming to me right now. But this training that was, part of the co-op development in democratic governance and business analysis, financial statements, served a lot of these very talented Indigenous leaders well, and they went on to work in government. People like Bill Lyle, who was our president of the Federation for many years, who passed a little while back. And these skills are being used today, or these leaders are still active today in the founding of Nunavut, the founding of a lot of Inuit associations, land claims, devolution, all of these activities that we are still a part of. I think it was an earlier time the co-ops were much more embedded in this political dynamism. It's changed a little bit since there, but our communities and our leaders are still highly involved in these political activities and these Indigenous movements that they're moving towards self-determination. It's something of great importance. So again, this is the broader milieu that we've worked in historically. And again, much different than our competitor and other people who have been in the North. Okay, next slide, please. I went on that one a little bit there. So getting into the work itself, the first thing I was asked to do in the early part of my contract about a year ago was to develop a model. And as I first heard it, I heard it as, well, find something, go and look and see what's out there and pull it off the shelf for us to work with. So I was encouraged to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals to see what's going on with the cooperators and see what's out there. So we didn't have a strong process defined at first, but this is what we ended up doing, is just seeing what's out there, getting inspired by it, getting feedback on some of my ideas, and then reworking it before a board review. That's a picture not long before I left Nunavut. Nunavut's on the west side of Hudson's Bay, right on the Arctic Circle, and they pull in a bowhead whale about every 3 years. It's shared between communities. So that was a hunt in September that came in there. I also say too, I don't have pictures of people, at least not their faces, in here, mainly because I don't have permission. I don't want that to get in the way of anything other than we are here for our members and our people, and the people are what really inspire my work for sure. Okay, next slide, please. I think I got all my notes there. I was also given a criteria for the model if we wanted to make it broad in scope. So we included environmental, social, economic, and also cultural concerns. Again, we are working in Indigenous communities. Some of them are quite traditional. The communities I worked in Inuktitut is the primary language. English is used as backup, and there are people who don't speak much English or any in some cases there. So again, these are things we want to include, and it's besides just language, but it does include language as a large component. And I also talked my direct VP, Mary Nerlungayuk. She's quite a well-known co-op leader who is from the North originally and has worked here in home office for some years. We talked a bit as well. So she also wanted to make sure we're using our existing strategic planning pillars. I've heard this is best practice from other places as well. You don't change your strategy to fit in sustainability. You make sustainability fit with your strategy. So we're currently in our 2022 to 2025 plan, and those are our 5 key areas there. And she also asked me to make sure it's relevant to members in the North. And that was something that when I heard it, I kind of needed to align inside me a little bit. And I say this because, again, as someone still processing my experiences from the North, it is a different part of the world. It's not the same as down south in ways sometimes you don't expect. And I think if you haven't lived in the North for some months, I'm going to say, and see some seasons, talk to people, and especially develop trust to the point where people are telling you about their lives in their words. And even then, you're maybe struggling with language sometimes and context. But unless you have that, I think it's hard to appreciate what life is like in the North. And yes, there are challenges, and sometimes that's all you see on a bad day at the co-op. But it's more than that. There are a lot of things going on in these communities that are beautiful and wonderful and smart and traditional that, and I'm not picking my words very well here, but again, it takes time to see that and just to scratch the surface of understanding. And it's encouraging me now at this stage to ask, what stories do I tell? What stories are mine to tell? What stories do I tell, and how does that reflect on our members, and is this true to their experiences? So I'm trying to be careful in how I speak about it, to be respectful for our members, and also learning not to speak sometimes, because it's not always up to me to talk. I need to talk less quite often. Next slide, please. So I did, getting into the research, I mean, what are we going to use? And let's see what's out there. So I did start with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I looked in other places as well, but I like them. I mean, we've all seen these. They're comprehensive. They're developed through, however faulty, but a democratic process through the UN. They're used a lot. I mean, they're used by a lot of people, which gives them some common language currency. And as I looked, I mean, a lot of our home office partnerships, those folks are using them as well. Like the city of Winnipeg is using them. Our competitor uses them. How do the people in mind here? St. Mary's is using them, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought they'd be really helpful for home office, especially to develop benchmarks to compare and talk across boundaries. Next slide, please. But as I started to do more research, I found that there was concerns about the UNS SDGs from an Indigenous perspective. Now, it's not the same as the millennial goals that were developed some years ago, where there was no input from Indigenous groups, but there is a sense, or there are comments that there wasn't sufficient Indigenous input, and there's not enough Indigenous perspective put into the way they are applied. And this is important because of our ownership base and who our members are and our co-ops are. I couldn't just ignore this. In part, I wanted to say, okay, I found something good enough, but I really had to keep looking. And it kept bringing me back to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP is a little bit easier to say. And so, I felt obliged. I felt like I had to keep looking to see what else was going on out there. And I had to look at what was going on within Indigenous associations around sustainability. So I kept looking. Next slide, please. And in that, I found a whole world of, dynamic, interesting, thoughtful leadership on sustainability. A lot of the work I used was from Inuit Tapiri Kanatami. They're a pan-Canadian Inuit federation, only because they got really great reports. There were others as well. I didn't find as much in terms of what I needed. I shouldn't put it that way. As much that was as comprehensive with information from Dene and Gwich'in web pages, but the themes are similar, and we have to understand these are also smaller nations that may not have the same funding as Inuit groups in Canada. But I thought you read these things; they're written by Northern leaders for Northern people about Northern issues, and they would be relevant to the members. It's something it makes sense. They're also developed through democratic processes, either through formal boards or other mechanisms. They're inclusive. I mean, Inuit and Dene groups work together on caribou management. Gwich'in, Dene, and Inuit are all together at the Arctic Council. There are these crossovers and similar themes, although of course there's also a difference between subarctic and Arctic, requirements for sustainable thinking. And the big part for me, those they're holistic and based on Indigenous self-determination, where you see the UN Sustainable Development Goals often in a grid or maybe a bit of a matrix. These you have a lot of these looping circles. Connections, and you have these tight connections between the accelerated climate change in the north impacting ice formation, travel on ice, hunting, food security, diet expenses involved with buying store food, infrastructure impacts with fires and melting permafrost, and also the knowledge, traditional knowledge. I mean, the elders' knowledge of ice and other conditions are not, depending on the community, or sometimes are not as impactful as it once were, which has a huge impact on the culture where elder and traditional knowledge is prized and respected and used and relied upon. So again, the whole world in here, and I knew this would work very well for our members. It was very inspiring, and I thought I had found resources that I was not aware of that were great. Only problem is, next slide. There's working in the north, as I mentioned, is different than the south, and then people in the south sometimes don't always understand the north. And it's something we work on here: is how do we bring people together so we're not talking like this, right? I know that's not going to translate my hand movement. How do you bridge this? And I do see this as part of my role, is trying to bridge this, because I do have experience with Southern co-op management, and also I've been in the north a little bit. And just for context, I pulled this out as a bit of a joke. On the left is my desk, my first week when I got to Winnipeg in June, all kind of nice and tidy. And then on the right side is my desk in Arctic Bay. And the rifle is only out because it had just come up in the mail, and I had to get it registered. And it's not Texas. But sometimes you look around up north and you're surrounded by, what you're seeing is such a different part of the world, and your work there is so different. And that's just as a Southerner working up there. Of course, the lives of individuals is a change still compared to my life. And by finding something that would work well in the office with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and finding these varied Indigenous models to work in the north, I just created a bigger problem I was actually trying to avoid. And it's important to bridge these things and develop understanding in both directions, because that way you're going to be more effective in your work and in your communication. I mean, the challenges are understandable. They're common in any co-op federation I have worked with or been on the board with. But again, when you have such a distance between home office and far north, and then also throwing in culture, language, lifestyle things, that you have to be careful and you have to be thoughtful. So next slide. So I kept looking. This was some more research, and I actually stumbled across this. Thankfully, I stumbled across the two-eyed seeing model. So this was originally devised for a healthcare context, much amongst the Mi'kmaq Nation out in Canada's East Coast. And essentially, it asks us to use a Western as well as an Indigenous perspective when approaching an issue, a problem. And through this, we'll have better understanding, a broader scope of tools to use, and it also develops better respect and understanding between the groups. So have a look at this. It was developed by Albert and Mordena Marshall. I think there was an academic from the University of Cape Breton as well, and I forget her name, so sorry. Mordena passed away some years ago. Albert, at the age, I think he's 86 or 87 now, is still out talking, and he's expanded the use from outside of healthcare into other areas, education as well as sustainability. I think he was in Winnipeg to just talk about that last spring. or this spring actually, he was out. So again, it was a very comprehensive model, and it's also something. I mean, you read it and you understand it, you get it. I felt aligned on the inside, and anybody I've shared it with who wasn't already aware of it kind of goes, "Oh, I get it." I think it's also good because it will translate easily enough for the North. We have a lot of elders on our boards, and we'd have a lot of work in translation to support their participation. So again, I think it's an important part to include in our model. Where am I going? Okay, next one, please. Next slide, please. And when I talk about Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, again, it's kind of like when the co-op's going up into the North. I mean, we're not going into a vacuum. We're not working in vacuums up here. So there are traditional values and principles you can just find online. There's ones for the Dene Nations. There's ones for the Gwich'in Nations. We're somewhat similar. Again, I'm more familiar with Inuit knowledge bases. Again, I only know this much, like a little tiny bit, but I'm a little bit more familiar. So there are Inuit societal values. And I think it was in the 90s it started where people recognized that traditional knowledge was of value for the modern world and addressing contemporary issues. So this idea of Inuit Kwajimaja Tukangit, or IQ is a little bit easier to say, is prominent, especially if you look into what's going on with the government of Nunavut, and it's something I think we can adopt more here too. I mean, and again, the co-op model, there was, early days, a lot of training with, formality of governance, Robert's Rules of Orders, resolutions, all of these things, and the members are fantastic with it. They understand it and they use them quite well. But again, we're dealing with other cultural values at the same time that are running parallel. And I think that we have to be respectful and understanding that there's ways of doing things that are different than what we might only do in our co-op governance model. And especially if you're up north, especially, you'll notice the elders. I mean, you hear a lot about the elders, but the elders are traditional knowledge holders. They have authority. I mean, I kind of call it the soft power, but a few words, a comment or two can really shift a conversation. And that's just what I saw as someone who doesn't speak Inuktitut or wasn't, always at tables where elders were discussing issues that impact the community. Okay, so those are some resources too. I got the Actually, skip back. Thanks, Veronique. That book up at the top there, Inuit Kwajimaja Tukangit, is from Fern Book Publishing. I got that wrong. I have a link at the end though, and it is a way to walk in if you're not familiar with this. And of course, there's more. It gets more complex than that, but these are interviews with elders from some years ago. Okay, ready for the next one now. Thanks. So if you put it all together, all these things I tried to stick together. So we, in the middle, we put our pillars. So, I want to connect the sustainability models to those pillars. On the left side, I attached the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they're in green because we often talk about greening the economy and these things. On the other side, I put Indigenous sustainability plans. Now I left that broad because it's going to depend on the community and on the issue. I don't want to take something that's only Inuit and put into a Dene community, vice versa, or maybe we need to use different plans in different places. There are a lot of tools to work with. So I put that on the other side as a generic statement for now, at least. But you notice that's in blue, and people, especially in the high Arctic or in the Arctic, they talk more about the blue economy. That can refer to the marine economy and the marine environment, but also the need for cold, the need for ice, the need for snow, and even in Dene communities where they're not as much involved with sea ice, they have undergrounds. They traditionally use underground cellars in the permafrost for storing food, and with permafrost melting, now we're getting into community freezers and stuff like that. So again, the blue, the cold, the ice is important. I wrapped it all around with a two-eyed seeing approach to try and integrate it. And I put UNDRIP at the bottom as a foundational tool. And I think originally I was thinking more about putting in something that would bolster pride, give something to feel good about. And it's not a good way of putting it or even a good way of thinking. But, in the weeks and months that followed, I realized I've heard this might be a game changer in Canada. It's going through the process of being implemented into Canadian law, at least as I understand it. Again, I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm just learning. And I've heard some leaders talk about this being a game changer in Canada. Sorry, I think I mentioned that, but it also that the road to net zero crosses across Indigenous lands, whether it's for critical rare earth minerals, power lines, etc. This is something I think we're going to be contending with, and definitely we see this in the north with the Inuit associations making substantial investments in renewable energy and other activities. Okay, so we're going to connect, unify, and respect. And this was our idea of trying to pull it all together and keep this front of mind when we're talking about sustainability issues. Okay, I'm glad you like it, Liam. Thank you. I feel like it's amateur hour sometimes, but I have a lot of passion. So then whatever that's worth on a Tuesday full of turkey. Okay, so the next two steps. Okay, we got our model, now what? In some ways I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be easy, you just get into it, right? But it was a lot more complex than this. I needed to really have a lot of discussions, really get aligned with people. So the next step, the second one, was to get this embedded into our culture, organizational culture. And this came from our CEO, Rod Wilson, who might be online. Something he had requested and stated as something very important, like how do we get this embedded so it's not just a one and done, it isn't just like a model sitting on a wall. So that's something, again, I had to take inside me and think about a little bit. I'll get into that in the slides ahead. And then the focus areas were the third step. But what are we actually going to dig into? That actually got saved for the end. This picture is actually the red roof building in the back is the co-op, and now it's actually a very nice co-op, one of the bigger ones and one of the more successful ones in the community. Now it's a community of about 1,200 people. And this is a summer scene. And sometimes you always see the pretty scenes of the beautiful, sunrises and the cute kids and all that about the north. But this is also the north too, especially in the summertime. There's scenes of hunting, kids bike, a lot of kids in now yet bikes. This is some of the older housing stock and fuel tanks and sewage tanks. And, this is also life in the north too. Sometimes gritty, but also very active. And now it's great. There's a lot of game, a lot of hunting in now yet, and people are, it's a fairly strong, healthy community. Also, and again, the process, again, just discussion, data collection, reviewing, reworking, and board review. That's the steps we followed in this area. So let's get into this a little bit, please, Veronique. Turn my pages. And some of this, when Rod talked to me about the culture, I mean, again, it took me a little bit to figure it out, because I think how I read it is like, what is the leadership required to get this done? And he's kind of, your CEO's looking at you, and I'm thinking, okay, what's going on inside of me as I'm trying to process this? How am I going to be effective? And I had to, as an early step, even just for myself in my own journey, is just understanding what leadership model would be most effective. And I had to contend with what I'm going to call dynamic tensions. They're not bad tensions, but they are there. And on one hand, I've got to create create clarity for our leadership. I mean, it's a big organization, it's busy, we do a lot of logistics. Had to be clear for them, but at the same time too, I mean, the needs on the ground for our members are diverse and evolving, and every community is also different. They're not all the same. Even ones that are close by are very different. As I learned, between Pond Inlet and Arctic Bay, that's only a day snow machine ride away. On my side too, in many ways, I'm empowered and with a very strong mandate. This came from the board. This went to our CEO. I have access to all of the senior leaders thanks to Rod. But also, I only have soft power. I don't have any resources to command. This role is not a managerial role, and that's fine. I don't need to be at the table. But again, it's something I've got to balance. I've also got to engage our hierarchy and our governance. So the board, management, sort of that matrix of management and hierarchy. But I've seen a lot of benefit from cross-team in iterative learning, where I'm kind of coming in sideways, seeping in, being some grease and glue. It's been supportive as well. And then also, it requires a strong role from a home office. We also have to balance this with the autonomy of our members. Like, we don't tell them what to do. We are a service group on their behalf, right? So again, there's balance in this as well. So I decided that, the best approach for leadership would be a collaborative one or a democratic one. In God, names escape me. Leadership models. Anyways, collaborative. We'll leave it at that. And again, I didn't want to get into a command and control type. It's not my style anyways, but also I have no resources to command or control. I've only got influence and a bit of gray hair to whatever that's worth. But also, I didn't want to set an inspiring statement either, because I can't promise anybody we're going to get to the top of that mountain. And this way here, I can talk to people. And this has been interesting. The conversations with people, especially senior leadership, have been fantastic. Once people start talking and they see the breadth of what we're trying to get into, see the models we're working with, they get excited and the words come out and the ideas are shared, and then it trickles into their teams. Okay, so that's my approach to the culture. Rod also asked for a two-line statement just to make things flow during meetings, a way to get the idea embedded, a way to spark some interest. So the two-line statement I came up with is called Our Cooperative Actions Today for Everyone's Better Tomorrow. It seems to be sticking. People seem to like it. I've heard Rod use it in a presentation, and it sounds really great in his voice, so we're going to stick with it. So that's just a little piece, and that's just on the other side of Arctic Bay. Sometimes icebergs get stuck for the winter, so you can go up and have a look at them. So that's me literally touching the tip of the iceberg. They're really cool. You can see in about 2 or 3 feet in this beautiful blue. It's quite nice. Okay, next slide, please. And then I also, when I talked with the senior leaders and other people, like our subject matter experts, these are some of the themes that came out. And so I'm calling them cross-team drivers. There could be activities or responsibilities that are owned primarily by one team, but this should impact everybody. So the first one I've got down is incentives and funding. Like we're not huge. I mean, compared to Federated, we're quite small. We do have critical mass. We do have funds. So how do we incentivize sustainable behavior as is broadly understood, how we're approaching it? It could involve bonuses, it could involve other things, right? But, maybe having a change to the balance scorecard, et cetera. But we do have resources to utilize. And also, how do we create funds to finance some of the programs I'd love for us to get into? One time we had a pop can recycling program where we brought cans back from the north in exchange for our community donation, and that was funded through a 10-cent surcharge on plastic shopping bags, which are no longer there, and the program itself kind of um, slipped away for a few reasons, as can happen. But are there other programs like that we could develop to restart in a different way so we can pay for things that's not all coming from our bottom line? The next one would be ambassadors and partners. Ambassadors I see as internal people or enthusiastic people or subject matter experts, and we do have a few who have done excellent work with sustainability. Especially there's one woman here who's done a lot of work around finance, and there are others who are interested. So these are people who would be supports to the senior leaders to help get things into the teams and the hierarchies and keep things on the agenda. And it's also understanding too, like this is about a 20-hour-a-week job for me. This is about half time, so it just can't be me, right? And the other side is partners. That's more of our external partners. We've had a tremendous support from the cooperators, especially when I was still living in Guelph. I could walk up the hill in 10 minutes, and I've met with Tom Ewart and others. They've been open and lovely and transparent and have shared so much that have helped us get here along the way. Also, a couple of profs I've met through Cask and Fiona and Anne-Marie, who have also been fantastic. And these partnerships I know will grow. And it's more than just those three, but those are the three I remember at the moment. Next, leadership and learning. Again, it can't just be the Glenn show. We need other leaders to come up, but it's also training involved with this, especially I'm thinking our board and ESG training, especially as the disclosure environment is shifting. And also we got Bill C-59 we talked about this morning as well. So can we get this embedded into our training for our board? Can we do bolt-on sessions for our in-house leadership program that we have, and also for our managers in the north? So broadly speaking about ideas. Of course, underneath this, there's a bunch of points we could get into, but I'll keep it high level because of time. Actually, we're made for time. We're gonna be okay. And then reporting is the other side. How do we get this embedded into our reporting? So it's part of our daily thinking, whether we want to look at financial disclosures in the future, my internal reporting and updates to the various teams here, as well as, thanks for that, appreciate it. And as well as updates, internal updates, but also our annual impact reports, our annual reporting. How do we put this in so it's front of mind and it's integrated with our other components? Okay, have I got everything? I think I do. Next one, please. And these are the focus areas that I would like for us to get into, at least in the near future. The first two came about through discussions and my own research and experiences. So commitment to climate really is having some commitment to addressing our carbon footprint. I mean, our supply chains are carbon intensive. We fly a lot, we ship a lot. The communities themselves can be carbon intensive because they burn a lot of diesel to generate electricity. At least right now, there are some projects going into communities. I mean, historically, Dene-Gwitchin and Inuit people have not contributed much to climate change. Right now, it's a different story. But even then, too, there's been studies in the Inuvialuit region, the Western Arctic, that shows that the average, person in that region emits less carbon than people, I think, in Edmonton or Calgary. So, but nonetheless, we are serious about net zero by 2050. I think we need to do something, and we have some ideas about what we might be able to do. Infrastructure essentials. This is about our buildings. We have a lot of real estate, a lot of buildings, hotels, stores, staff housing in the north, garages, and they are at risk to climate change. Permafrost shifts are already happening. Fires, as you can imagine, Yellowknife, Lutzel, K are dealing with fire. So what can we do to protect current buildings, sort of climate proof? What can we do to also look at the way we build in the future? Are there greener, or I guess bluer ways to build, to use less energy, to have some protection from climate change? And this is a big part of what ITK has in their work as well. And again, this is also, there could be some elegant solutions here around cost savings as well. And I tried to find elegant solutions where I could. The next two came from our members, actually, the delegates who were at our annual meeting this past April and May were surveyed about the top sustainability issues from their perspective. And a lot of these delegates are elders in the community who have been active in issues in their communities, in their nations for some decades, if not, and years. So the second most important one was country food. Country food, for a number of reasons, is valued in the North. It promotes health, in terms of being outdoors, hunting, sharing knowledge, but also the food itself is very healthful for people. And there are parts of the far north where, because of climate change, migration and animal migration is changing. Ice conditions are changing. It's becoming harder to access country food in some places, and I saw a difference in Nunavut, where they still have a lot of caribou, especially, but also walrus and seal, narwhal, beluga, and some whale on occasion, large bowhead whale, compared to Arctic Bay, where the herd on Baffin is in decline. I think I read in Iqaluit there was 57 tags issued for all of Iqaluit, and they were gone by August. That's not going to provide much food for people. Now our members asked for supports around, fuel, power equipment supports. There's also an issue with ammunition and rifles. Because of the war in Ukraine, a lot of production was being shipped, and also political instability in the US. Apparently, people were stockpiling because whatever they do. But we are, so that's another point too. You can't get bullets if you don't have, a rifle to exchange. It's hard to get out to hunt and get food for your family and for your community too. There are community hunters as well who'll go out and hunt for the community. And the most important issue raised by the delegates was local job training and employment. But in the commentary I heard during the meeting and sometimes on the side, there was also requests to have more local management. So it's something I want to look at as well. I talked to somebody at FCNQ and someone who's doing research with them, and they do have a very strong local management presence, much more than we do. We rely more on Southern managers. Now, our stores and our business model isn't, you can't compare directly, but I'm surely we can be inspired to look at things, to see what else we might be able to do to support more employment, and to see it as more of a career option for people, because we also, there's work to be done, and it is hard to find Southerners to go north. It's already hard to find a good manager, let alone a good co-op manager, let alone one who's willing to go up north and stay for some period of time. So I think there could be things here to look at, and even if not, it was requested by the delegates, so we are obliged to look into it and assess that for them. Okay, so the next step. And just to be clear, I got help with all this. This is not me. This is like a team around me that keeps me going. My direct boss, Bev, our VP, Mary, Rod, others have all been involved with this. So one request came in just to make sure, all these ideas you might have for these focus areas, make sure it's structured. So we have it clearly defined into, okay, what's home office for the Federation, and what do we want to bring to the co-op members in the North, and all the diversity and complexity. And inside of that, each one will be broken down into things that are tactical, things I can just get into, or one of us can just get into without much concern. Things that are strategic, that are aligned with our current strategic plan, and this makes it hit the senior leadership team with a bit more impact. And then things are going to have to be put into future plans. They may not have a home right now, but we'll look at it later and put it into the planning. And that's for our senior leadership team, and especially our board to decide upon. That's not for me to do. Next slide, please. And just as one example of how this looked, this is from a presentation to our senior leadership team. This is how it might look. Again, I don't want to focus on this because it's just ideas to look at. They haven't been improved, but this is how it would look for each category. Okay. Next slide, please. I think we're doing good for time here. So when you put it all together, this is what it looks like. It's the original model that was devised, part of my original contract request. That was approved by the board last December, and they really liked it. It was quite encouraging. It's nice. And again, it had a lot of work to get there. I had it reviewed with people here, then it went to the senior leadership team for feedback, was reworked. It was by the time it got to the board, it had a lot of attention and TLC. Our cross-team drivers as part of that culture of sustainability, our efforts to get this embedded, and then the four focus areas, at least for the near future. Okay, and our line at the top, our cooperative actions today for everyone's better tomorrow. Okay, next slide, please. So these are things that are in motion right now. It's pretty light, at least in these first few months. The board just saw the focus areas and the cultural drivers, but it was 2 weeks ago I presented it to them, and they were in favor and they were supportive. They want to see, updates in their next quarterly meeting about what we're actually doing. So the pressure's on me to start producing. But just internally at the office, some things I could get going on easily without the board sign off was getting into looking at carpool and transit supports for home office staff. We are working with the Green Economy Canada to address our greenhouse gas emissions, try and look at reductions and setting targets. And that's a partnership that came to us through the cooperators, through I think Tom Ewart before I started. So thank you for that connection, Tom, if you're online. Looking at relaunching that pop can recycling program, see what we can do. There was a bit of money left over in the fund from its earlier iteration, and we're going to start small. Something I've learned about any sustainability program is starting small, gaining traction, getting small wins, and learning. I don't want to start something with all 32 co-ops and complex supply chains and recyclers in Montreal. Let's see what we can get going. And I have one district support advisor who's keen to work with his communities on it. So we're going to have a call in the next 2 weeks. I had to also just bring some updates to our home office recycling. Again, it sounds small. All of this stuff has splatter effect, if I can use that word for translation. Things that they seem easy, but they become complex. So that needed work as well. We also, our supply chain team is looking at improving our supply from Kivlik Arctic Foods in Rankin Inlet. They actually process caribou, muskox, Arctic char, and sometimes beluga and narwhal, depending on availability. So they work with hunters to coordinate hunts, bring in food for processing. Our supply chain processes and theirs weren't lining up too well, but they've been on the phone to get this worked out. And in an early test, one of our co-op hotels, they want to have country food, caribou and Arctic char in their offering for the restaurant as a starting point, which I think people would be really fond of, especially I don't think there's caribou in that community. Don't quote me. Okay, but we're just trying to get that going because there are communities, if they don't have the caribou, it's a way to get people food that they appreciate and like that is appropriate for them. I'd like to do a little bit more too, just to look at the costs and other things there. I've had a couple of really good connections so far with academics. I think there's more I might have out there. Fiona DeWitt, I said your name right, forgive me. I know through St. Mary's when I went through the program there has been fantastic. And also Anne-Marie Marianne's doing some work with research work with FCNQ. She's done that before. And just a wealth of information, enthusiasm. And I think there are some projects there we're going to look into around research. Fiona had talked about, could we look at our measurements around these Indigenous sustainability tools? We have a way to set targets and measure ourselves. We don't just talk about it in general. The big thing I've been undertaking the last few weeks is getting ready for a 2025 budget. We want to do things next year. It's got to make sure there's money in the budget for this, and this is a whole process here. It's a complex operation. There's a large budget process. So I've been having chats with the various team leads, the VPs and directors about programs you might want to get into, and they don't all involve a budget line. Some do. For the most part, I think we'll just be getting going on things, doing a lot of research, trying to get this worked out. And this, is important because I think the senior leadership here understands with strategic initiatives, it takes time. If you rush it and try and get something banged out in a few months, it might work, it probably won't, but things that take time where you do the research, you do your testing, and sometimes that takes a couple of few years, it does tend to work out better. And this is something, a learning we've had internally that I've appreciated. Okay, next slide, please. What are we doing? Oh, getting on a little bit over, almost done, folks. So how did we innovate? And I want to be really clear here. Everything I've presented so far, it's not mine, right? I didn't do much. I feel like a kindergarten kid cutting out shapes and the glue gun, sticking things together sometimes. I found things on the internet that were easy to find and put them together in a way that might be unique. I'm not even going to claim that. And I also had so much support and so much clarity was given by our board and by our senior leadership team here. So I think when it comes to innovation, because this was about innovation, I think this is where it happened. In my opinion, I might have another opinion tomorrow or next year. Time, I was given time to figure this out. I was given time to research and discover. And along with that is trust. And yes, we had timelines, there was a deadline, and I gave updates all the time, but it wasn't rushed and there wasn't undue pressure. Again, there was trust from my manager, and there was two VPs involved with this project who gave me a lot of leeway and knew I would get it done. And again, they saw the updates, so they were encouraged, and I was inspired as well. So whatever that was worth. The collaboration, again, internally was one thing. Other people have also collaborated and have been fantastic. And again, I'll mention Tom and his team at the cooperators who just were wide open with information. Others as well too. And I won't name everybody because I'll forget names here, but this was very important. I know it's very cooperative, but it's important. We would not be here without that collaboration. Honoring the work already done. We have incredible thinkers, thought people. Oh, sorry, I hope you're not seeing my screen. But there's a lot of intelligent people out there, and I don't know a lot of these leaders, but I'd like to get to know them in the years to come. The leadership given to this was fantastic. Again, our board requested this. They were wondering what we were doing about sustainability. Our CEO, Rod Wilson, is on the board for the cooperators, and I sense a lot of inspiration from him. I know this is important for him, and he made sure I had access to the other senior leadership team members, and they've been open door as well. Like I said, very enthusiastic, asked really good questions, and have given me good advice about how best to proceed on certain topics. And then the process itself, as much as there was sort of grease and glue in the background, a lot of soft systems, a lot of discussion, we also have a formal system where, again, I presented to the senior leadership team, got that feedback, and also the board was given a chance to review it as well and gave their feedback and their process. So our democratic process was honored through this. And I should say too, our board, except for one person, our board is entirely made up of Indigenous members of our community co-ops, many who are elders and have a lot of skills, leadership skills from their communities. So again, we're surrounded by a lot of talent here. So I think that's how we innovated. What have I got next there, Veronique? I'm talking a bit. The land acknowledgement. I know we're supposed to start with this. I didn't want to share this unless you have a small sense of where I am in my learning about the issues that affect our communities. And I haven't even touched upon the fact that I'm calling in from Winnipeg. This is Treaty 1. I am new here. There is a very deep history of Indigenous gathering here. I live about a quarter mile from the Forks. They've unearthed about 6,000 years of history, but also Winnipeg itself is about 20% Indigenous. So it's an active. This is not history. This is an active, dynamic, living city. So I shared that calling in from Treaty 1 with my understanding of what that means, and also respecting the lands that we work on and the people who are on those lands and what that means to our members. Next slide. What we got? We can get this out. This is some further reading, and you won't be able to see that. Maybe we can get this out in another way if folks are interested, and especially because I've talked a little bit too much. But these are some early things that helped me. And finally, last slide, on behalf of all the people who have been part of this, Koyanami, Masichu, merci and thank you.
Thank you so much, Glenn. And for your information, everyone, we will send those presentations in both languages via email. And same thing, we'll also provide you with a survey so you can share your thoughts about not only Glenn's presentation, but also all the presentation that we will be having during Co-op Week. This is the fun part. This is the part where you can ask questions to Glenn regarding his presentation and the innovative work that Arctic Co-op does in terms of sustainability. So what you can do, people, is just raise your hand. Interior should be able to see who do that and be able to give you the possibility to talk. So let me know. Should be able to see. Okay, I see Eric Gosselin. You can ask your question in French. And Glenn, if you want to have interpretation, do you know how to do it? Yes? Okay.
Oh yeah, hang on, let me get that. My French is so terrible.
Oh, it's
Français.
not terrible. It's actually very good. So I'll
Yeah.
just allow Eric Gosselin to talk. You can talk
Bonjour.
now.
Hey.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, okay. Yeah, I'll ask in English. Nice to meet you over the Zoom, Glenn. We haven't had a chance to meet. I'm from Winnipeg, but I'm in Quebec City for a few months. Tell us, if you can tell us more about the country food first. That's awesome. Are you working with researchers to, like, I don't know, to figure out migration patterns of caribou, or how to anticipate where the food is going to be, or is that a next step in the process?
No, we're not that fancy. No, I think the first step, well, the delegates asked us to provide subsidies for fuel, power equipment, and other hunting materials. There are community hunters who know the animal migration patterns and all of that, so we don't need to get involved at that level. It's just the expense. Again, sometimes with the inflation, it hits the north all at once with sea lift, like the fall comes, and all of a sudden the new prices are in for food, for fuel that is shipped up as well. So it can be a shock. And definitely the run on power equipment during COVID is starting to hit the north too, because things go up about once a year. So that was the main thing. I mean, I've also have concerns personally, and maybe people in the communities would see it differently. But in Nunavut, where there was active hunting versus Arctic Bay, where there wasn't, and just the impact on the mood of the community, health impacts, and there's always other things that can happen in communities. I'd like to make sure people have the option for at least caribou. I notice people really love caribou up north. Char is not as much of a concern because it's not hard to go out on the boat and put a fishing line in the water. But if you don't have caribou nearby, at least in Arctic Bay, your options there were limited to narwhal, which requires a fast boat and a big engine. It's a little bit different in Oberon Pond Inlet. They have walrus as well, but that's not an easy animal to catch. So no, it's not that. And they work with Kivalliq Arctic Foods. Again, those are people who work with community hunters to bring in food for processing. I'd like to get it out at a lower price. By the time the air freight and everything gets in there, it's pretty expensive. But no, we're not involved with scientists or anything like that. Our community members though are involved. Like I've talked to one of our board members about migration on where he is and whatnot. So I feel like a very dull answer to a very potentially exciting question.
Super interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric, for your question. We have around, I think, 5 minutes left. Oh, 3 minutes left. So maybe there's time for one last question. Don't be shy. You can raise your hand. I'll see you and allow you to talk. Going once, going twice, going thrice. Is there anyone that want to ask a question to Glenn before we end this webinar?
I can add one comment if it's useful.
Of
people don't mind saying.
course, go
Of
ahead.
course, yeah, but just I know people are shy sometimes, and but you want to go back one slide or to that reading list, or 2 slides, whatever it might be. The reading list there. So there's one in the middle there. It's an Arctic Co-op case study from Ian McPherson, and it's a bit dated from '01, but it is an interesting history. And there's another one out too. I should have put the other one in there, but when I mentioned that a lot of the co-ops started during that fervent part of the late 60s, early 70s, our sister co-op FCNQ started before Arctic co-ops. I think there was an early attempt to have a pan-Inuit co-op, our federation, sorry, but the government in the Northwest Territories at the time that included what's now Nunavut were a bit more conservative. I think they saw it as the thin edge of the wedge for socialism. But it was a bit more progressive in northern Quebec because of the Desjardins movement. But apparently that that co-op federation was known as a bit of a political underground. A lot of things went through there, so it's some interesting history if you look into it. And Ian's history too addresses some of the challenges of, bringing a European co-op model into a traditional setting. I mean, it's co-op values are aligned with traditional governance, but they are different, right? The formality that was brought in is a little bit different. So again, this is interesting. I should also mention too the biography from William Lyle. I mentioned him briefly. There is a whole series of books from Nunavut Arctic College about northern leaders. Bill was a fantastic cooperative leader from the north and on our board for many years. Also very interesting too. And some of the reports, you check out what's going on with Inuit Tapiri Kanatami. Fantastic reports about climate change, food security issues, other things. And again, these things are all connected in a way much stronger than with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And also in the Inuvialuit Louise settlement region, they've got some fantastic reports around energy usage, et cetera. So people trying to text me. So again, there's some really great information. That's just the stuff that got me going. And there's a lot more out there if you want to learn about these issues.
Well, I think we are out of time. Thank you so much for your time, Clan. This was
Thank you.
fantastic. And
Thank
I
you.
saw a lot of comments from people in the chat saying that you were amazing, and I agree with them. So thank you so much for participating into co-op with this. This is amazing. And I hope that everybody will see you in the next few one. We are seeing Retourne-y and also another co-op working in food that is Radish Cooperative. So I'm so glad that everyone was there. Thank you so much and see you next time. Thank you. Have a good one.